There are men who break loud, and men who break quiet, and in 40 years of writing for other people's brands, I have learned to fear the quiet ones. The loud ones you can hold by the collar until the worst of it passes. The quiet ones go off somewhere behind their own eyes, and what comes back is not always the same animal that left. The night the water took Caleb Ware's wife, the wife he had never once laid eyes on, the wife who had crossed 2/3 of a continent on the strength of 4 letters and a tintype, Caleb did not make a sound. That is the part I want you to hold on to, because everything that happened after grew out of that silence, the way a flood grows out of one bad afternoon of rain. He stood at the lip of the wash with the lantern shaking in his fist, and he looked at the place where the road used to be, and the only thing that moved on him was his jaw. I have a brass watch that quit keeping time in the autumn of '79. I keep it anyway. I was turning it over and over in my pocket that night the way a man worries a tooth, because I did not know yet what we would find when the water went down, and I have always been a coward about not knowing. What we found changed the boy. What we found after that, well, sit close. The fire's good a while yet, and this is not a story you tell standing up. My name's Tom Rourke, and I am too old to be useful and too stubborn to admit it, which is why Caleb Ware kept me on as foreman of the Lazy W after his daddy passed, when any sensible man would have pensioned me off to a porch. I keep a tally book, not just for cattle, though God knows I count the cattle, but for weather mostly. Inches of rain, days of frost. The first morning the wash runs and the first it goes dry. My wife, before the diphtheria took her, used to say I'd rather record a thing than feel it, and she was not wrong, and I have never forgiven her for being right about me out loud. I tell you this so you'll understand that I had the storm written down before it ever became a tragedy. The 14th of June in my own cramped hand, heavy cloud building in W since noon, air gone green, cattle drifting to the high ground without being pushed. The cattle knew. The cattle always know before we do. I should have known too. Caleb didn't know anything but the date the stage was due. That was the trouble with him those last weeks. He had gone soft in the head the pleasant way a young man does when he has decided to be happy. For 2 years he'd run that ranch like a sentence he was serving, up before the dark, down after it, never a word more than the work required. His daddy had been a hard, cold post of a man, and Caleb had grown up in the shade of him, and by the time the old man died there wasn't much left in the boy but the habit of endurance. He could outwork any 3 hands I ever hired. He could not, for the life of him, sit at his own table and eat a meal like it gave him pleasure. Then the letters started. He never told me how he came to write the advertisement. I suspect he didn't tell anybody, but I noticed the mail mattering to him, which it never had. I noticed him shaving on a Tuesday, and one evening in the spring he came out to where I was doctoring a horse's hoof, and he stood around the way a man does when he's got something stuck in his craw, and finally he held out a tintype and said, "Her name's Eleanor." I looked at it. A plain, sober-faced woman, maybe 25, with her hair pulled back so tight it must have ached, and her hands folded in her lap like she'd been told to. Not pretty exactly, but she was looking dead into the camera in a way most women in those photographs don't. Most of them look off to the side, like they're already wishing themselves elsewhere. This Eleanor looked straight out level, like she was sizing up whoever might someday be looking back. "She's from Ohio," Caleb said. "She taught school. Her sister married and there wasn't room," and he stopped. He wasn't a man who explained himself. "She writes a good letter." "That's a fine thing in a wife," I said. "Better than pretty." He almost smiled. He put the tintype away like it was made of glass. The 14th of June she was meant to arrive on the noon stage to Coronado, and Caleb would drive the buckboard the 11 miles in to fetch her, and the preacher would meet them, and that would be that. A married man by supper time. He'd whitewashed the inside of the house. He'd bought a stove with a warming shelf and a length of yellow gingham he didn't know what to do with, so it just sat on the table. I never said a word about the gingham. Some kindnesses are just keeping your mouth shut. But the air went green by noon, like I said, and the cattle drifted, and by 2 in the afternoon the sky in the northwest had stacked itself up into a wall the color of a bruise. I'd seen that sky maybe 4 times in my life, and every time it had meant water, not rain so much as water, a thing that falls in the mountains 30 miles off where you can't see it, and comes down the dry washes in a brown wall taller than a man, fast as a galloping horse, with no warning but a sound like a train you can't get away from. The stage rode to Coronado, crossed the Diablo Wash 3 times. I found Caleb hitching the buckboard. "You're not going," I said. "She's coming in on that stage." "That stage isn't coming in. No driver alive crosses the Diablo with that sky up. They'll have laid up at the Mendoza place to wait it out. Any sense in their heads?" I put my hand on the harness. "And you waiting at the Coronado depot in a flash flood does her exactly no good and gets you drowned, and then she arrives a widow before she's a wife. That's a poor wedding present." He looked at the sky. I watched him do the arithmetic, and I watched the want in him lose to the sense, which I was glad of at the time and have regretted ever since, because if he'd gone he'd have crossed before the water came and maybe, but no. A man can drown himself in maybes faster than in any wash. I know. I've waded out into that particular flood plenty of nights. The storm hit at 3:30. I have never heard the like before or since. Not the thunder, we get thunder. It was the wind first, a wind with grit in it that scoured the paint off the north side of the barn, and then the rain came sideways and stopped being rain and became a single falling thing, a roof of water, and I could not see the bunkhouse from the main house 20 yards off. We got the stock in. We got ourselves in. And we sat, Caleb and me and 2 of the hands, and we listened to it, and Caleb did not say one word for 2 hours. He sat by the window with his hands open on his knees, palms up, like a man waiting to catch something. Around 6 it began to slack. By 7 there was a sick yellow light low in the west where the sun got under the cloud, and the world dripped and steamed, and you could hear the washes. You could hear all of them at once, that low continuous roar that means the country is moving, that the dry bones of the land have filled up and are running for the river. A rider came up the lane at a dead gallop in that yellow light, and it was Domingo, who worked the relay station at the second Diablo crossing, and his horse was blown near to dying and Domingo himself was gray in the face, and before he was off the animal he was calling out, and the word I caught first was coach, and the next word was agua, and then he found his English, or enough of it, and what he said was, the stage. The stage went into the wash, the noon stage from Tucson. It did not lay up. The driver, he tried to make the second crossing before the water. Caleb was already moving. I want to be careful here, because this is the part that gets told wrong. People hear it and they make it into a tale of a desperate bridegroom riding hell for leather to save his bride, and that is not what it was, because there was no saving to be done, and Caleb knew it. The Diablo at flood does not leave anybody to save. What Caleb did was worse and braver than the story people want. He rode out into the dark knowing that the best he could hope for was a body to bury, and he went anyway, because the alternative was sitting in a whitewashed house with a length of yellow gingham on the table, and that he could not do. I have thought about it many times. There is a kind of love that has nothing to do with knowing a person. He'd never touched her hand. He went into the flood for her name and 4 letters and a level-eyed look in a tintype. And if that is foolishness, then I don't know what to do with the word. I went with him. So did the hands. We took the lanterns and we took rope, though God knows what we meant to do with rope, and we rode the long way around to come at the second crossing from the high side, because nobody but a fool comes at a flood from below. It was full dark when we got there, and the water had already started to drop. That's the cruelty of a flash flood, it's gone near as fast as it came. All that fury just gone downstream to drown the next county. And what was left in the wash was a churning brown mess of water maybe 4 feet deep where it had been 20, full of whole uprooted trees and the carcasses of drowned things turning slowly in the current. The lanterns didn't show much. They showed the brown water and the steam coming off it and our own breath. We found the coach a quarter-mile down on its side, jammed against a stand of cottonwood that had caught it like a net. 2 of the horses were dead in the traces. 1 had got loose. The driver we found further on, and I will not describe it, except to say that Caleb knelt by him a moment and closed the man's eyes with 2 fingers, gentle, the way you do for kin. There was a strong box. There was a soaked carpetbag with a woman's initials worked into it, E.M., that Caleb pulled from the mud and held against his chest and did not let go of for the rest of that night. There were the personal effects of strangers scattered down a half-mile of wash, a child's shoe, a man's spectacles, a Bible swollen to twice its size. There was no Eleanor. We searched till the lanterns guttered, and then we searched in the dark by feel, all of us, up and down both banks, calling, though the only thing that answered was the water. Caleb did not call. Caleb went up and down the bank methodical as a man counting cattle, turning over every snag, wadding out to every pale thing that might have been a face and wasn't, and his silence got into the rest of us until we stopped calling too and just searched, grimly, the way you finish a thing because stopping is worse than the doing. By the gray of morning we had found 3 of the 4 passengers the waybill said had boarded at Tucson, a drummer in a checked suit, an old woman, a young man who'd been going out to his uncle's mine. We did not find the 4th. We did not find Eleanor. And here is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I wrote in my tally book that morning in a hand so shaky I can barely read it now. No body. Searched to the river ford. No body. Because a body is a terrible thing, but it is a finished thing. A body you can bury and grieve and put a stone over. What Caleb had was an unfinished thing, a soaked carpetbag with another person's initials on it and a half-mile of mud and not 1 square inch of proof that the woman who looked straight into that camera was dead or alive. The water gives up its dead, usually in a day or 2 downstream. We watched the ford for 3 days. We rode the banks. The drummer turned up and the old woman miles down. Eleanor did not. It was the not knowing that broke him, and it broke him quiet. He went back to the work. That's what scared me. A man who weeps, a man who drinks, a man who picks a fight, those men are grieving, and grief runs its course like a fever. Caleb just got up before the dark and went down after it, the way he had before the letters, except that now there was a hole in the middle of him where the happiness had been, and he went around it the way you'd ride wide of a sinkhole. He put the yellow gingham away in a trunk. He kept the carpetbag in his room. He did not say her name again. I'd have let it lie. What good's an old man's worry to anyone except for 2 things? The first was the horse. The coach horse that had got loose, the one we never accounted for. A relay horse, branded with the stage company's mark, and it never came home to any station and it never turned up dead. A loose horse with a flood behind it runs uphill and downwind, away from the water, and the country uphill and downwind of the second Diablo crossing runs back into the broken red rock of the Rincons, the canyon country, and beyond that into land that on the company maps was marked only with the word of Peschiria. Nobody went up there. There'd been quiet on that frontier 2 years running, an uneasy quiet, the kind that holds only so long as nobody does anything stupid. A loose horse running into that country meant nothing, probably. Horses run where they run. The second thing was the boy who came down out of the Rincons, 11 days after the storm. He was an Apache boy, maybe 12, riding a stage company horse. That stage company horse, I'd swear to the brand, and he came to the edge of our south range bold as you please and sat his horse and waited to be noticed, which is not how a frightened child behaves and not how a thief behaves either. He waited. And when I rode out to him, slow, with my hands where he could see them, he looked me over the way that woman in the tintype had looked at the camera level, sizing me up, and he held out his closed fist, and when I put my hand under it, he dropped something into my palm and then turned his horse and was gone up into the red rock before I'd even looked down to see what he'd given me. It was a button, a small mother-of-pearl button, the kind that runs up the front of a woman's traveling dress, and threaded through its holes, knotted careful so it wouldn't fall, was a single strand of long brown hair. I rode back to the house with that button closed up in my fist so tight it left a mark, and I did not know yet what it meant, not for certain. But I knew it meant something, and I knew that Caleb, who had gone off behind his own eyes and not come back, was about to come back, and I was afraid of it. Because there are men who break quiet, and when the quiet ones finally move, they do not stop. I found him in the barn, mending harness by lantern light, his face closed up like a fist. "Caleb," I said. He didn't look up. I opened my hand under the lantern so the mother of pearl caught the light and the brown hair, and I watched him see it. I watched him go very still, the stillness of an animal that has caught a scent it can't believe. He set down the harness. He stood up. He took the button from my palm so gently you'd have thought it might break, and he turned it in the light, and he looked at that single strand of hair for a long, long while. A smiling man is supposed to be a comfort. Caleb's smile that night in the barn put the hair up on my arms because it was not the smile of a man who has had good news. It was the smile of a man who has finally been handed a thing he can do. For 11 days he'd been drowning in the one situation a man like him cannot survive, a situation with no work in it, nothing to push against, nothing to lift or mend or carry. The button changed that. The button gave him a direction. And Caleb Ware would walk into the mouth of hell whistling, if hell had a chore that needed finishing. "She's up there," he said again, and turned the button so the light ran along it. "Somebody pulled her out of that water, Tom. You don't braid a strand of a dead woman's hair through a button and send a boy 11 miles to put it in a man's hand. That's not a thing you do for the dead. That's a message." I'd thought the same, lying awake the night before with the button on my windowsill where I could see it in the moonlight. But there's a difference between a thing you think in the dark and a thing you say in the lantern light, and I made myself say the hard part. "It might be a message that she lived a while," I said, "and didn't keep living. A grave's a message too, son." He shook his head, slow, certain in that way that worried me worse than doubt would have. "Then they'd have sent the button and let me come and bury her. They sent a boy who waited to be seen. They wanted me to follow." He looked up at me, and there was the old Caleb in his eyes, the one from before the storm, except sharpened like a tool that's been on the whetstone. "She's alive, and she's hurt, or she can't travel, or something's keeping her up there, and they're telling me where to find her." I have learned in a long life that you cannot argue a hopping man out of his hope. You can only decide whether to let him go alone. I did not let him go alone. We left before dawn the next morning, Caleb and me and Domingo, because he'd ridden these frontiers all his life and knew 3 words of Apache to my none, and because the relay station was his charge and the lost woman weighed on him in a way I understood. 3 men, no more. Caleb wanted to take the hands, take rifles, take rope and a litter and provisions for a week. I talked him down to 3 of us and short guns kept holstered, and it was the hardest talking I ever did, and the only thing that finally moved him was when I said, "You ride into the Rincons with 5 armed men and a litter, and whoever's got her up there sees an army coming for what they took. You ride in with 3 and your hands empty. You're a man come to ask. Which one do you think gets her back?" He didn't like it, but he was not a stupid man, only a grieving one. And there's a difference, though the 2 look alike from the outside. The Rincons are bad country. I want you to understand that, because the men who tell this story afterward in the saloon make it sound like a morning's ride, and it was not. It is broken, red rock stood up on end, country that the water has been cutting for 10,000 years into a maze of canyons that double back on themselves and dead end against cliffs, and open without warning onto drops that would kill a horse and rider both. The stage company's loose horse had run up into it because a panicked animal runs uphill from water, and we followed because Domingo could read the sign. A turned stone here, a cropped bunch of grass there, the old faint scratch of a trail that was a trail before any white man came to the territory, and would be a trail after we were all gone. We climbed all that first day. The heat came up off the red rock in waves you could see. My old bones ached, and I did not complain, because Caleb did not complain, and a foreman cannot out-soften the man he's following. We made a cold camp that night in a slot canyon where the dark came early and the cold came hard, and we did not light a fire, and Caleb sat with the carpetbag. He'd brought it. The soaked-tan dried carpetbag with EM worked into the side, sat with it across his knees and his hand resting on it, and he said to nobody. I don't even know what her voice sounds like. Domingo, and I let that lie. Some things a man's got to say into the dark and not have answered. 4 letters, Caleb said. She had a way of she'd write a thing plain, and then at the end of the line she'd put some small dry joke, just a few words like she couldn't help it. Told me about her sister's wedding, the whole sad business of it, no room for her after, and then right at the end she wrote that the wedding cake was dry as a deacon's sermon and not half so short. He almost laughed in the dark, and then the laugh went somewhere bad. A woman who can make a joke out of being turned out of her own home. I thought, a woman like that, we'd do all right. 2 people who'd learned to laugh at the worst of it. I thought we'd do all right. I turned my dead brass watch over in my fingers. It's a habit. I don't even know I'm doing it most times. You still might, I said. Don't, he said, not angry, just don't, and I didn't. We found them the morning of the 3rd day. Or rather, they found us, which is the only way you ever find Apache who don't want finding. We came up out of a long canyon onto a kind of high bench, a flat shelf of land tucked under the rim with a spring at the back of it and a green smear of cottonwood and willow around the water. A hidden place, a good place, the kind of place a people who have been hunted learn to keep secret. And there were riders on the rim above us and riders behind us in the canyon mouth before we'd gone 20 yards onto that bench, and they had not been there a moment before, and then they were, the way a thing you've been staring at suddenly resolves into a face. 6 of them. 8. I stopped counting because counting was no use. If they wanted us dead, we were dead, and the only weapon worth a damn now was the empty hands I made sure mine were. Caleb reined in. To his everlasting credit, he kept his hand off his gun. He sat his horse with his hands loose on the horn, and he looked up at the riders on the rim the way that woman had looked at the camera level, taking the measure of what stood in front of him. A man rode down off the rim toward us. Not young, my age maybe, with a face like the country we were standing in, all hard plains and old water cuts, and gray coming into the black of his hair. He wore a faded army shirt that had belonged to somebody else first and a cartridge belt, and he carried a rifle across his saddlebow with the casual familiarity of a man who has carried one his whole life and used it more than he wished to. He stopped a good ways off, out of any sudden rush, and he looked at the 3 of us a long while. Then he looked at the carpetbag across Caleb's saddle, and something moved in his face. He'd seen it before. He knew what it was. He said something to Domingo, who answered haltingly, and there was a back and forth I couldn't follow, Domingo's poor Apache and the man's poor Spanish meeting somewhere in the middle, and I watched Caleb's hands the whole time, watched them stay loose, watched the discipline it cost him, the way the tendons stood out on the backs of them. Domingo turned to us finally, his face strange. He says, the woman, she is here, she lives. I heard Caleb's breath go out of him. Just that. A long breath like he'd been holding it 3 days, which I suppose he had. He says, Domingo went on, slower now, picking his way, that she does not. He frowned, asked the man something, got an answer, frowned harder. He says she will not come. The bench went very quiet. Even the cottonwoods seemed to stop their rustling. Will not, Caleb said. He says, Domingo wet his lips. He says it is not for him to say why. He says you may speak to her, but he says. And here Domingo looked at the older man, and the older man looked back at him steady, and Domingo translated it word for word like he didn't want the weight of it on himself. He says, do not put your hands on her. Do not raise your voice. She is under their protection now. She asked for it. If you take her against her wish, you do not leave this place. Do you understand? It was not a question. The older man had not asked a question in the whole exchange. Caleb sat there. I could see him working it. The whole architecture of the thing he'd built in his head these 3 days, the hurt woman, the message, the rescue, the chore he could finally do, I could see it shifting under him like sand. He'd come to lift a fallen thing back onto its feet. Nobody had told him the fallen thing might not want lifting. "I'll speak to her," he said. "I'll keep my hands to myself and my voice down. You have my word and I keep my word." He looked up at the older man and said it again, slow to him, like he knew the man would take the meaning even without the words. "You have my word." And the older man, "I'll remember this till I die," the older man nodded once, like he believed him, which is a thing that should not have been possible between 2 men who'd known each other 90 seconds across a gulf of blood and language and everything else. And yet it happened, and I have thought about it many times since. Maybe a man knows another man's word when he hears it. Maybe it crosses over even when nothing else does. They let us off our horses. They took the guns politely, you might say, if such a thing can be polite, a young one collecting them and setting them aside without any drama to be returned, the older man indicated when we rode out. And they walked us back toward the spring, toward the green, toward a brush shelter built up against the rock where the shade was deep, and a woman came to the door of it. I had only ever seen her in a tintype, but I knew her. She was thinner than the photograph. Her hair was loose, not pulled tight the way it had been for the camera, and it was clear now why there was a long, half-healed gash up one side of her head, into the hairline, the kind of wound a body gets when a flooding river slams it against a rock, and her arm was bound up against her chest in a way that said the bone underneath had been broken and set. Set, I noticed. Somebody had set that arm with care. There were marks on her face from the water and the rocks healing. She stood in the doorway of that brush shelter, and she looked at the 3 of us, and her eyes went past me and past Domingo and found Caleb, and she knew him too, the way I'd known her from a tintype, from 4 letters, from a thing built up in the dark out of almost nothing. For a moment, nobody breathed. "Mr. Ware," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it had a crack in it she fought down. So that was what she sounded like. Caleb had wondered in the dark what her voice sounded like, and now he knew, and I watched him hear it for the first time, and I watched it nearly take his legs out from under him. "Miss," he stopped. He didn't know what to call her. They were strangers who were almost married. "Eleanor," he said, finally, soft like the carpetbag, like a thing that might break. "You came up here," she said, "into this country for me." It wasn't a question and it wasn't gratitude. It was a woman doing arithmetic of her own, working out what kind of man would do such a fool thing. "The stage went into the wash," Caleb said. We found the coach, the driver, the others. We never found you, I thought." His voice did something then and he mastered it. "A boy brought a button with a strand of your hair. I thought it meant you were alive. I thought it meant you wanted." He stopped again. And something crossed her face. Surprise, then a flash of something darker, and she turned and looked at the older man, looked at him, hard. And there was a long moment where I understood that I was watching the second half of a conversation whose first half I'd missed, and that the button had not been Eleanor's idea at all. The older man met her look and did not flinch from it, and he said something in his own tongue, just a few words, and turned his palm up the way you do when you've done a thing you don't have to explain and won't apologize for. Domingo very quietly gave us the gist. The boy and the button had been his doing. The grandfather's for the older man was the boy's grandfather. He had sent for Caleb. He had wanted Caleb to come, not, it seemed, to give Eleanor back, to let her choose. "You didn't ask me," Eleanor said to the old man in English, knowing he wouldn't follow the words but trusting he'd follow the iron in them. "You sent for him without asking me." And then to Caleb, the iron going out of her, something more frightened underneath. "I didn't ask him to send for you. I want you to know that. I was going to." She looked down at her bound arm. "I don't know what I was going to do, but I didn't send for you." "Why?" Caleb said. "Just the one word. Why? Why didn't you walk down out of these hills the day you could stand? Why a brush shelter and a strange people and a broken arm set by strangers' hands instead of the road home, the road to home, the whitewashed house and the new stove and the length of yellow gingham? Why, when a man crossed a continent of his hope to find you, why would you not come? And here is where the story gets heavy. And here is where I have to tell you the thing I have never told in any saloon, because it is not a thing for laughing men. She told him why. She told it plain, the way she wrote her letters, and she did not put a dry little joke at the end of it. It came out in pieces over the long hot afternoon, with Domingo translating sometimes for the old man's part of it and Eleanor telling her own. The water had taken the coach the way water takes everything in this country, sudden and total. She remembered the driver shouting, remembered the world turning over, remembered the brown roar and then nothing. She had come to on a sandbar a half-mile down, in the dark, in the rain, with her arm broken and her head split, and no notion which way was anything. And in the first gray of morning, the old man's people, moving their camp ahead of the same flood, up out of the low country toward the Rincons, had found her. They could have left her, a white woman, a thing that meant only trouble for a people who'd had nothing but trouble from white women's husbands and fathers and sons for 40 years. There was a man among them. Eleanor was careful about this. And so am I. There was a man whose whole family the soldiers had killed years back, in a camp at dawn, women and children both, and that man had wanted to leave her on the sandbar, and no one could have said he was wrong to want it. The old man had overruled him. The old man had said, and Eleanor had this through the boy, who had a little English learned God knows where, the old man had said that they were not the soldiers, and that a hurt person was a hurt person, and that he would not begin to become the thing that had been done to him. So they carried her, up into the Rincons 3 days, on a litter, a broken stranger who could do nothing for them and might bring the whole cavalry down on them if she were found. They set her arm. They cleaned her head. The women fed her from their own short rations, and when she was strong enough to understand where she was and who they were, she had understood something else too, something that the 4 letters and the tintype in the whitewashed house had never prepared her for. They saved my life, she said, when it cost them, when the safe thing, the sane thing, was to leave me. There's a man here who lost everyone, and he looked at me, at my face, Mr. Ware, at the kind of face that took everything from him, and he didn't leave me. They carried me 3 days. They went hungry for me. She was crying now, but level, the tears just running and her voice holding. And the cavalry is going to come up into this country. Maybe this year, maybe next. The quiet won't hold. And when they come, somebody is going to tell them. Somebody always tells them that there's Apache up in the Rincons, and the soldiers will ride up here and they will not ask who saved a white woman's life. They'll do what they did to that man's family. At dawn, to the women and the children. She looked at Caleb, and she said the thing that I have carried in me 20 years. If I go back down with you, I become the proof that white people came up here, the proof they were found. I become the reason the soldiers ride. I be trading these people's lives for my own comfort, for a stove and a clean house and a husband I've never met. She wiped her face with her one good hand. I can't do it. I sat up here for 11 days trying to find a way to do it, and I cannot. And then the old man sent for you anyway because he said it wasn't right that you should never know. That you should be allowed to come and hear it from me. That a man who'd write those letters deserved to hear it from the woman herself and not from a button. The bench was silent. The spring ran. Somewhere a child laughed off among the willows, a small, ordinary sound, and it landed in that silence like a stone in a still pond. I looked at Caleb. He'd come up into the Rincons to do a chore, to lift a fallen thing, to finish the unfinished business that had been killing him by inches. And here, at the end of the climb, he'd found that the chore was not the one he'd packed for. The woman wasn't broken and waiting. She was whole in the way that matters, whole enough to have made the hardest choice a person can make, to weigh her own life against the lives of strangers who'd been kind to her, and to come down, every time, on the side of the strangers. There was nothing to lift. There was nothing to carry. There was only a question now sitting in the middle of that hidden bench, and it was Caleb's to answer, and it was the heaviest question I ever saw set in front of a man. Because Caleb Ware could do what he'd come to do. He could be in the right, the whole right, the law and custom and his own broken hope all on his side. He could take his bride down out of the hills. The old man would not stop him. That was the terrible thing. I understood it now. Do not take her against her wish had been the rule, but the old man had bound himself not to fight a man who came in honest. And Caleb had given his word to keep his hands down, but Eleanor could not be made to come, and Caleb could not be made to leave her. It was all snarled up into a knot no rope trick could undo. He could insist. He could plead. He could stand on his rights as the man she'd promised herself to. Or he could do the other thing. The thing that would cost him everything he'd built in the dark, every plank of that whitewashed house of hope. He stood there a long while. The old man watched him. Eleanor watched him. I held my dead brass watch in my pocket so hard the case left a print in my palm that lasted into the next day. And then Caleb did the thing that I came up into the Rinkins fearing he would never have it in him to do. The thing that told me, too late, always too late, that I had badly misjudged the quiet boy I'd watched grow up in his hard father's shade. He took off his hat. He took off his hat to a broken-armed schoolteacher from Ohio and to an old Apache man in a dead soldier's shirt. And what he said next changed 3 lives that I know of and likely more I never counted. And it is where I'll have to leave off for tonight, because the fire's burning low and my voice is going. And the last part of this is the part that takes the most out of an old man to tell. A man's hat is a small thing, but out here it means more than back east, because a man does not take it off lightly under this sun. He takes it off in church, and over a grave, and when he means to say something he wants weighed full. So when Caleb Ware took off his hat on that hidden bench, with the spring running behind him and the old man watching and Eleanor crying level and quiet, I knew that whatever came out of him next was going to cost him, and I knew he'd already decided to pay. He turned the hat in his hands the way I turned my watch. Then he looked at Eleanor and he said, "I'm not going to take you anywhere." She went still. "I came up here," he said, "with a notion in my head. I'd built it 3 days on the trail and 11 days before that, and the notion was that you were hurt and waiting and I was the man who'd come carry you home. That was my notion. It was about me mostly, if I'm honest, about the chore I needed to do so I could stand to live in my own skin." He stopped, gathered it. "But you're not waiting to be carried. You made a choice up here that's bigger than any choice I ever made in my life, and I'd have to be a small, mean kind of man to come all this way just to take that choice away from you." "Mr. Ware." "Caleb," he said, "if we're going to talk straight, it's Caleb." A breath. "You weighed your own life against theirs and you came down on their side. You're willing to give up everything, your name back, your people, a roof, a husband, even one you've never met but who, God help him, has been half in love with 4 of your letters since spring." His voice cracked there just once and he wrote it down. "You're willing to give up all of that so a band of folks who owe you nothing and you owe everything don't get rowed down at dawn. That's the bravest damned thing I ever heard a person say out loud. And I will not be the flood that comes and takes it from you." The old man could not have followed 1 word in 5, but he was watching Caleb's face and Caleb's hands and the hat turning slow in them, and whatever a man reads in another man across the gulf, he read it, and something in his own hard face eased a 1/4 inch, which on a face like that is the same as another man weeping. Eleanor said, "Then why did you come at all? If you weren't going to," she couldn't finish it. "Because you were worth the coming," Caleb said simply. "Dead or alive, gone or staying. A woman who'd make a joke about being turned out of her own home, who'd weigh strangers' lives heavier than her own. That's a woman worth crossing bad country to lay eyes on once. Even if it's only once. Even if I ride down out of here alone." He put his hat back on. "I'd have regretted not coming a lot worse than I'm going to regret going." And there it was. The whole thing turned inside out. He hadn't come to rescue her. He'd come, though he didn't know it till the moment he said it, to release her. To be the one person who'd crossed her continent of trouble and then, at the end of it, refused to add himself to the weight she was already carrying. I have heard men say a great many things they thought were love. That was the first time I heard it and believed it all the way down. But the story does not end clean there, and I'd be lying to you if I dressed it up as if it did. Caleb gave something away on that bench, and giving it away didn't make the wanting stop. He stood there a man who'd just done right and been hollowed out by it. And Eleanor stood there a woman who'd just been handed back her own choice by the one person with the power to take it. And I have never in my life seen two people more married and less able to do a single thing about it. It was the old man who broke it. He spoke for a while to Domingo, longer than he had any time before, and Domingo's face changed as he listened, and when he turned to us his voice was unsteady. He says Domingo cleared his throat. He says he has watched. He says the dying the woman she has hands. She has taught the children letters in the dirt with a stick. She has set a bone better than their own healer when their healer was away. He says she has earned a place, not as a thing they keep, but as one of them if she wishes it. And he says, Domingo looked at Caleb and then away. He says the man who would give up the thing he wants most so that strangers may live, that man also has a place if he wished it. Not down below. Up here. He says the quiet will not hold forever. He says when it breaks, a man who can be trusted, who has cattle and a name among the white men and a reason to speak for them, such a man down below might be worth more to them living than any rifle up here. The bench was quiet again. The willows moved. I understood slow what the old man was offering. Not a wedding, nothing so simple. He was laying a map of the years to come across that bench, the cavalry that would come, the quiet that would break, and inside that coming storm a place for both of them. Eleanor up here becoming one of these people in truth, hands, and heart. Caleb down below, on his ranch, with his name and his standing, a man who knew, who'd been up into the rinkins and come back changed, who'd speak for them when the speaking mattered, who'd ride up the back trails with warning when warning was needed, who'd lie to a colonel's face if a lie would buy a dawn. Two halves of one strange marriage stretched across a frontier that wanted them dead for it. You're asking me to be your eyes down below, Caleb said slowly, working it out. When the soldiers come. The old man waited on Domingo, then nodded the single nod. And her, Caleb looked at Eleanor. She stays up here, becomes one of you. Another nod. And I ride down, and we don't, Caleb stopped. The arithmetic of it was cruel and he made himself say it anyway. We don't get the house, the stove, none of it. We get this. A bench in the rinkins twice a year maybe, if I can ride up without bringing the army on my back trail. We get a marriage that's mostly two people knowing the other one's alive across 40 miles of rock. Eleanor said, very quiet, it's more than I had 2 weeks ago when I was a body they never found. And Caleb laughed, a real one this time, cracked and wet and astonished, the laugh of a man who has just realized the joke is on him and doesn't mind. Dry as a deacon's sermon, he said, and not half so short. That's what you wrote me about your sister's wedding cake. He shook his head. I've been carrying that line around 3 months. For the first time, Eleanor smiled. The level-eyed look from the tintype, but warm now, broken open. You remembered that. I remembered all of it. We stayed 2 days on that bench. I'll not pretend I was easy the whole while, an old man among armed strangers in country no map would help me out of, with my guns set aside in a pile and my whole hide depending on the word of a boy on a stage horse, and the reed between 2 men who couldn't share a sentence. But the fear wore off into something else, watching it. Watching Eleanor show a small girl how to make her letters in the red dirt. Watching the old man and Caleb sit of an evening, not talking, couldn't talk, just sitting by the same small fire passing a thing back and forth between them that didn't need words. The understanding that they were now bound, the two of them, by a secret that would get them both killed and a woman they'd both, in their different ways, decided to keep alive. Watching the man who'd lost his family, the one who'd wanted to leave her on the sandbar, watching him keep his distance from Caleb, his face shut, and watching Caleb let him. Not push, not try to win him. Just let the man hate what he had every reason to hate and tip his hat to him anyway each morning slow and get nothing back and tip it again the next morning all the same. By the second evening the man wasn't sitting quite so far off. That was all. That was everything. When we rode down, they gave us back the guns, and they gave Caleb something else. The old man's grandson, the boy who'd carried the button, rode the first miles with us, down through the maze, putting us back on country we knew, and at the edge of it he stopped his stage horse and looked at Caleb a while. Then he said in his careful English, "When they come, the soldiers, you will send word." "I'll send word," Caleb said. "Same way you sent me a boy a button, I'll know it." The boy nodded, exactly the way his grandfather did, the single nod, the thing that runs in a family across a language and a war and everything else. Then he turned the horse and was gone up into the red rock, and we rode down alone, two of us where three had climbed, and behind us on a hidden bench a schoolteacher from Ohio was teaching Apache children their letters in the dirt and was, by every law and custom I was raised to, a dead woman. Caleb went back to the work, but it was different now and I knew the difference. Before the storm he'd worked to fill the hole where his father had been. After Eleanor was lost he'd worked to keep from feeling the new hole. Now he worked like a man with a reason, because the ranch wasn't just a ranch anymore, it was a position, a name among white men that he was keeping sharp and respectable on purpose, the way you keep a knife you mean to use. He went to church. He shook the colonel's hand at the spring social and smiled, and asked after the man's wife and listened close, for any talk of the Rinkins. He put the yellow gingham back out on the table. He rode up twice that first year. I went with him once. I'll not tell you what I saw except that she looked well, and her arm had healed crooked but strong. And there were more children at her letters in the dirt than there'd been. And the man who'd wanted to leave her on the sandbar carved her a comb out of horn that winter. Domingo told me later and would not say why, and didn't have to. And the quiet held, that year and the next. I kept it in my tally book the way I keep the rain, no soldiers north, quiet holds. And every line of it was a small held breath. I am an old man now and Caleb is not young, and the tally book has gotten thick. And the quiet has not held forever because nothing does, and there are things written in the later pages of that book that I will not tell you tonight. There is a page with a date and the word button on it, and what came after, and the back trails we rode in the dark, and what it cost, and who we lost, and who we didn't. But that's a longer night's telling than I've got left in me, and besides, the part you came to hear is told. A storm took his mail-order bride. And what he found afterward, not on the sandbar, not on the bench, but in himself, in the moment his hat came off, changed his life clean through. He went up the Rinkins a man who needed a chore to keep from drowning. He came down a man with a country to keep, and a woman to keep alive 40 miles off, and a secret that would either be the making of him or the death of him. And as it turned out, before the end, it was some of both.